I'm Marc Loftus, and thanks for joining us for another Post podcast. In this episode, we're going to discuss the Dolby Atmos format and what studios need to do to take on Atmos work. I'm pleased to be joined by two pros from the industry with really impressive backgrounds. Let me start by introducing Tom McCarthy, who's with Sony Pictures Entertainment. He is a member of the Motion Picture Sound Editors. He's an Academy Award winner dating back to his work on Bram Stoker's Dracula back in 1992. Currently, he's the Executive Vice President of Post over at Sony Pictures Entertainment. So Tom McCarthy, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's good to be part of the podcast.
Thank you. And our second guest I'd like to introduce is Tom Ozanich, who's a mix engineer with a lot of credits, particularly feature films that many of you may have seen. Most recently, Warner Brothers' Legendary's Godzilla vs. King Kong, but he's also worked on A Star is Born, Joker, and I know you've done some Matrix work. So Tom Ozanich, thanks for joining us as well.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Great to have you. So interesting perspective in the sense that when it comes to Dolby Atmos, I think the word that you would think about when you hear of Atmos is immersive. The fact that you can kind of put sound anywhere you want it. And because of that, the sound experience is that much more immersive for the listener, whether it's in a theatrical environment or music, things along those lines. I know that Dolby has a couple of different areas where the format fits in. Tom McCarthy, you're in an interesting position because you're overseeing a massive facility that is putting this format into your studio workflows so that you can conduct business and bring in business. Whereas Tom Ozanich, you are a hands-on mixer who is taking advantage of what Atmos gives you to make the experience that much more immersive. Tom McCarthy, why don't we start with you and you tell us a little bit about Sony Pictures and what your Atmos goals are. I know that it's something that's ongoing, but something that you've been working on for a while now.
Well, we have 14 mix stages at our facility. And of the 14 mix stages, we now have 10 that are the Atmos format. We just finished 2 of them this past week. Dolby's tuning one of the rooms today. And our goal is, now that we have 10 stages, we still have 4 remaining. And what we find is we need to be very flexible and versatile with our clients. People will demand Atmos. You need to have it in your facility. You can't just have a small portion of mix stages that are Atmos. You'll get into a scheduling nightmare where a non-Atmos show is utilizing an Atmos stage. And then all of a sudden somebody comes that needs Atmos, they don't want to move stages, and it causes issues. So our goal is to now finish the other 4 mix stages into an Atmos format. Our plan is to do 1 additional stage this year, which will take us to 11. And then in the next 3 years, each year we will invest into renovating and remodeling the last 3 stages and incorporating the Atmos environment. And as I mentioned to you the other day, Mark, what's really important for our success, this is part of the Atmos experience, is to be successful in a facility, a post-sound facility, you need to have talent, technology, and culture, and you need all 3. And the only way really to get talent to come to your facility is to give them the technology and tools they need to be successful and draw in their clients. And then the third remaining piece that we look as a facility is the culture, which is the capability of having people that really collaborate together and work as a team, avoiding politics and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Tom McCarthy, you were a mixer yourself, obviously, so you have that hands-on experience in a studio. Now you're relying on the people in the studios to kind of pass along their needs, and by respecting those needs, that helps keep the talent there too, because they feel that you're listening. What is necessary when you are making a room Atmos compatible? If you go to the Dolby website, they have a lot of testimonials from like a Bradley Cooper and a Greta Gerwig, and people who've used it for the immersive experience. But for a studio that needs to go from whether they were doing 5.1 mixing or 7.1 to be able to do Atmos and have that certification that they're qualified to do it, what does that take for you?
Well, there's different specifications that come from Dolby depending on the size of the room that you're renovating into an Atmos environment. you're definitely going to need certain gear. We consistently put in JBL speakers into our rooms. Our smallest room, a home theater room, has 12 speakers. And then we span up into our larger stages, which are 360 seat to 260 seat theaters. And we're placing in 42 speakers based on specific guidelines by Dolby that tells us exactly where these speakers should be added to our stage. And we do that because it's not just about immersive for me, it's about the fact that it used to be picture told the story, but now, and sound was like the frame around the picture, kind of enhancing it. But in today's market with immersive formats like Atmos, it's sound is a storyteller just as much as the picture. Mm-hmm. And we need to be able to take the theater audience out of their seat while they're watching a movie and place them as if they're in the story themselves. And that's why we use the Atmos speakers to surround the audience with things, the imagery, sounds for imagery they don't even see on screen. But the important part is working close with Dolby.
Yeah, just to continue on the thought of the work that Sony Pictures is doing, it's not just Sony Pictures content. You're open, you do Columbia work, you do, I think you had said TriStar, was it Screen Gems as well? And then you're open to outside facilities that want to bring in work and take advantage of your audio post services.
Well, our facility, again, is massive. We can house 100 sound editors if need be. We have 2 Foley stages, 3 ADR stages, one of the largest scoring stages in the world, and the 14 mix stages. Well, Sony is not going to require the use of all that square footage at any set given time. And 40%, realistically, 40% of the work that we provide post-sound services for at this facility is third party from other studios and other streaming networks.
All right, so you really have to have the services in place because of all the external business that you're attracting.
Yeah, well, it's not just like we're a studio where, the studio is going to use your facility and you say, okay, that's great. Our facility is so big that we're just like an outside facility, whereas we need to be that client-oriented boutique shop that will have the necessities that a filmmaker will need to come to our studio. And we like to provide everything. We even have a room for playing visual effects back, preview room and color correction, so forth. And that makes us feel like what we've created, when you add in the culture, we have a creative campus for filmmakers. And a lot of filmmakers like to come to our facility from not just Sony, but outside work, as I mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Tom Ozanich, you have been working in the Atmos format for years now, and you've noticed a couple of trends recently. I know that you had said whether clients are using it. Can you talk about your initial experience and some of the more recent work that you've done using it, and what the transition was, maybe going from just a multi-channel surround mixer to using Atmos?
Yeah, so I think, I'm trying to remember now how long it's been. I would guess maybe, 7 years that ago that maybe kind of started diving into it. I could be totally off. It might be longer, but anyways, there was a lot to sort of wrap your head around and wrangle in the beginning. The technology has improved quite a bit from Dolby in terms of the actual RMU software and how the render unit, how it's actually functioning and interacting with Pro Tools. Back when I started doing that, it was all plug-in based stuff in Pro Tools or on the DFC. So it was very sort of detached, like there was this third layer that you had to deal with, which is all kind of gone away now. It's greatly improved. It's so much easier to use now than it was then. And honestly, there was some kind of clunky stuff where things didn't always function exactly the same way twice in a row, which was frustrating for people. So I think, I'd done a few things. Back at that point, it was very common to mix something in 5.1 or 7.1 first, And then after you were done with the mix, you would go and do an Atmos mix after the fact. And you might have a week or 2 weeks. And I hate working that way because, you can do it, but it's like you've already sat with something for so long and it's kind of baked into this way. And now you're trying to pull it apart only to put it back together slightly differently.
And I've seen on the Dolby website that one of their selling points is that you don't have to do this constant down mixing. There's almost, is it one deliverable that translates, or is that Atmos then gets turned into other formats for different deliverables?
We deliver all the different formats as those native formats. However, we will now go in and mix and do, a nice big blown out Atmos mix, and then rely on the RMU, which now has gotten to the point where it does very well, rendering down the Atmos mix to a 7.1 or a 5.1, and you have some parameters you can control on exactly, how it treats the surrounds or overheads, etc., and how it bass manages and stuff like that. So I would say for the last couple of years, we've relied entirely on that process to make our 7.1 out of the Atmos mix with, no difficulty whatsoever. I mean, it just works great.
So that's got to be a considerable time saving there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, I would say it doesn't really take any longer to mix in Atmos. It takes slightly longer to master the final product because you are making another, deliverable element. But once you've kind of established a workflow in Atmos, you just kind of do it. Just like, there's not really any difference between mixing in 5.1 and 7.1 in terms of your workflow. It is a little bit different for Atmos, but once again you've established that and gotten used to it, it's not a big deal. It's not like a big time suck or something.
Having talked a little bit before, I know that you said a lot of your work, you're an independent mixer, but you do a lot of work at Warner Brothers. Where are you now? Is that your home studio? Because you mentioned you had a home studio.
You mean currently I'm sitting in my home studio? Yeah.
Okay. And you're able to do some of your Atmos offline work there. Is that the case?
Yeah, actually, the movie I'm about to start for Michael Bay is going to be in Atmos, and I will start with pre-dubs here in my Atmos room. It's a 916 Atmos room. Mm-hmm. And then but the last, I just did, we did Godzilla versus Kong, like I said, and then Those Who Wish Me Dead. We just did Cry Macho for Clint Eastwood, and I did Coming to America, which we finaled at Sony. Mm-hmm. All of those I pre-dubbed in my home studio and then went, to either Warner Brothers or Sony or Formosa or wherever to do the final mix. Mm-hmm. And it works. There's a bit of getting to learn and understand your room and how it translates, but it works really well so far. So
the gear that you've put in your home studio, obviously you're in control of that. What Warner Brothers has, they're dictating. Tom McCarthy, you have input input from the mixers as to what they're requesting. What are some of the components that make this possible for you, especially if you're working in a traditional Pro Tools setup?
Well, our whole facility is Pro Tool based. It's been that way for a long time period. But what I do like to do, despite the allotment I have for capital in any given year, I might have a plan like we were discussing earlier that, okay, I've got 4 more stages that I want to put into the Atmos environment. That costs X amount of dollars, so forth. But I go to my talent. I go to my talent every year and I ask them, how is your room working? What would you need to improve it? What's going to make it so you're more efficient and more creative? And I allow, or not allow, I ask, I'm basically asking these guys, hey, give me some ideas, give me some input, because I'm not in the trench anymore. I'm not sitting in that mixed stage. And it's easy to be someone who's the boss or the person managing a facility to make decisions, but they're not going to be the correct decisions unless you're asking the people that are really involved in making this work happen. So each year, my capital might adjust and move, back and forward, and maybe extend out another year. But I'm always asking, as we build another Atmos room, and each stage is different. You have a small stage, is a lot different than building a big stage. What are the needs for the talent and the crew? The re-recording mixers are involved in every bit of the plan from day one to the end.
Tom Ozanich, how about your home studio? Are there components that you researched that felt were best for the room based on the work that you're doing and the size space? Obviously, you go to Warner Brothers, you're probably dealing with a much, much larger space. So what were your ideas going into doing the homework?
Well, I mean, my main goal simply was I wanted to get the most accurate, representation, translation to be able to do work here and take it there, or like I said, to Sony or Formosa, any of the places, but back and forth, and actually just be able to take the media, put it in place and open it up, and it works. So, there's a bit of a sort of learning process you go through to sort of debug those things and get things tweaked EQ wise. I've had Dolby here tuning the room and stuff. So, but what I ended up doing, just quick run through of some equipment, was I have JBL M2s as my LCR with I think it's a 4246, their dual 18 subwoofer. And then I've got 708s, JBLs all around for surrounds, 705s on the ceiling. Again, it's a 916 Atmos.
So you do have ceiling speakers in your home setup.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'm a big proponent of 916 is the minimum setup for mixing in Atmos. I think if you go 714, you're kind of leaving a plane out of the represented, rendered field. So
that
anyway,
last number, your overhead count, is that it? When you say 916, you're talking about your overhead?
So 916 is 9, speakers at, sort of regular surround level, and then 6 on the ceiling.
Okay.
So it's basically, if you started with a 7.1, you're adding 2 surround speakers that are halfway between the side and the front, this screen, and those are, I would say, that space is the most valuable space in the Atmos surround field that it's giving you. Even theatrically, when you've got 12 speakers down the wall, when you can place stuff into that, front space that doesn't exist in 7.1, it can bring stuff out off the screen and widen things and give you a bigger sound stage that you otherwise can't get, and it's not behind you. So anyways, as far as that equipment goes, it's all run by Crown DCI amps. Everything's well powered and bi-amped, and I have Focusrite interfaces. So it's all Dante RedNet based, so that I have, with the matrix, I can kind of control, I want to allocate a bunch of outputs to this machine or that machine, route it to anywhere. Have a lot of flexibility there. I can have my Atmos output playing simultaneously with re-renders and just hit a button to monitor any one of those things at any given moment.
Is that really the challenge, the fact that you're adding speakers and you now have to route signal to these additional speakers? There's a component there that you need beyond what you may have already had. And you mentioned the RedNet.
Yeah. You definitely obviously you're adding more speakers, so you're going to have more outputs. And when you go to 916, that's obviously 16 outputs. So that it's a nice number, but it's a little bit sometimes beyond some of the basic 714 stuff. And so, I use the Harman BSS, like a 160, 100, those boxes to control all the B chain stuff. That's the same stuff that Warner Brothers uses. Most facilities use those as their B chain controller. So anyway, so it integrates really well with, having a lot of flexibility and control over it.
Interesting. Tom McCarthy, you had said that we need to put Atmos capabilities in our studio so that we can get the business. And Tom Ozanich, I know you've said that there's almost a perception these days about the value of mixing in Atmos. If it's a more expensive part of a budget that maybe somebody doesn't need to, or that it's only good for action films and it doesn't have a place in dramas, and you feel differently about that. Either of you want to comment on the importance of it, whether it's from the business perspective or the practical applications of it? I mean, Tom McCarthy, you guys have a range of work coming in there. Is the non-action stuff still requiring those type of rooms?
Every film we're doing is requiring Atmos.
Okay.
It is just so standardized. I think the area where we teeter somewhat is maybe on the episodic programming, where some programming is demanding Atmos and others aren't. But again, just for scheduling, it's important to have that. And I'm kind of go off topic here, but I had something interesting I wanted to bring up, because during COVID, when we had to close up, we were sending editors and mixers home to work in their environment, just like Tom Ozanich is talking about. He mentioned about how his room is going to translate to another theater. And forgive me if I shouldn't bring this up, but prior to that time period, we've been working at Sony. We work very closely with Sony Technology, Japan. We work with them on integrating new technologies. And we were already beta testing this thing called 360 VME, virtual mixing environment. And when COVID hit, it was a lifesaver for us. This technology, we would bring in the sound supervisor or designer into the Cary Grant or the Holden, the Novak, small stage, whatever. And we would calibrate how the speakers were sounding in that room. They would put microphones in the talent's ear, calibrate how they hear the speakers in the room, and then provide them access to go home, put on any headphone, and hear what they're editing or mixing in their home as if they were in the stage they got measured.
Okay.
So that way, when they came back from working in their home environment, it was like they were mixing in the original stage.
They weren't far off. Yeah.
It was great. It was great. I'm sorry to go off topic, but I just thought that when Tom was talking.
Tom Ozanich, again, the work that you're doing, Godzilla, huge action film, probably easily takes advantage of that format. What about the less action-packed pieces? You still feel that there's value in using it as well, but you found a little bit of, I guess, people not being, or clients not necessarily feeling that there's the value.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there about what exactly it can do and what it's best for and things like that. And I think, the bottom line is that everything would benefit from it. I mean, maybe you could make the argument that sort of a real gritty documentary is not going to take advantage of that or something. And that may be a fair assessment. But at the same time, part of what you're getting out of Atmos, particularly theatrically, is you're getting a higher standard of the spec of the system that's actually going to play back. So, Dolby's not going to just let anybody throw in some speakers and call it Atmos. You actually have to do what Dolby says, and the speakers have to be good enough And the surrounds in Atmos are all full range. They're supported by bass managed subwoofers and stuff. And so the quality of the sound, you know, even if you only used the 7.1 part of Atmos, is still better than legacy 7.1. That, you know, that wouldn't exactly translate to home theater in terms of, you know, if there was only 7.1 in your Atmos track, it's gonna end up being the same kind of in home theater, but in an actual theater, it's gonna definitely be different. Anyways, as I was mentioning before, some of that front material is perhaps the most, you know, exciting and sort of, you know, creating a great reality versus the overhead speakers. We actually don't hear those as well, just the way our ears are. And they're great and they're fun, and it's a good thing to have. I'm not poo-pooing the overhead speakers, but I think having the discrete surrounds is, you know, even when you have winds and you have some birds chirping and whatever, obviously you have to mix it to take advantage of that stuff, but you're able to then have much more detail. And I'm always interested in mixing in 3 dimensions, not mixing in 8 speakers or, you know, 12 speakers or whatever it is. I want to forget they're speakers. I want to be, you know, sort of just believing the 3-dimensional reality that the soundscape is putting me in, and that I'm not even sure where the speakers are if you couldn't see them, you know.
And one other point I wanted to bring up, also on the budgeting, you said on an audio post schedule, the idea that it's really not any more expensive in the grand scheme of things, the amount of time that you would have to spend on this.
Yeah, I mean, if we take, I mean, a typical mix, I mean, is, you know, maybe 8 weeks. Out of 8 weeks, you're talking about that it might take, you know, a day or 2 longer to do Atmos, simply because we have to do an Atmos master and a 7.1 and a 5.1 and a 2-track master instead of, you know, only a 7.1 and a 5. So it literally is costing a day longer to make the deliverables on the theatrical side and a day longer on the home theater side, and that's basically it.
Tom McCarthy, do your clients understand that? Do you have to upsell them on this service, or are they pretty understanding of it?
They want, you know, in the very beginning, and I think Tom will agree with me on this, you know, it was unknown using a new tool, so it did take longer, and some people were a little hesitant to have the extra days for that format. It wasn't that well established quite yet. Today, it's so established, and it, as Tom said, he's exactly right. It takes no additional days to really mix in Atmos except for that print master day. You're talking outside of that print master day, maybe a few extra hours in determining the panning of specific sounds into different channels and different tracks. And I'd also like to say, I really like the way Tom's mentality and thinking is about forget the speakers and just think about the space and how the sound is showing in the space. That's really important to really being successful with the Atmos. And I also think, I'm curious of what Tom thinks on this, that most of the time, I think Atmos really excels when it's less busy. I think the payoff is really when that film that you thought, oh, it's just going to be an action film, and that's when you use the Atmos and sounds are going to fly all over the place. I think sometimes when it's cleaner and more defined, the format itself is more effective.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that's true, you know, any period, you know, Atmos or anything. But definitely when stuff becomes too busy and too dense, you lose the ability to tell what's going on. You know, you just kind of get lost in it. And so, I mean, that's a big part of our job as mixers, is to be able to filter through all of, you know, potentially thousands of tracks of stuff coming at us and figure out what stuff do you need to hear at what time and how clearly? And you know, I'm always, whether it's Atmos or 7.151, whatever, I'm always trying to make it clear and defined. And I like, you know, personally, I like the visceral feeling of the movement of stuff. And so I like to be able to dial into hearing a sound go by or over our head. And yeah, if you have too much going on, you can't tell.
It just muddies up the track at that point. So I'm totally in agreement with you.
Cool. Well, guys, I want to wrap up here. I appreciate both of your insight on it from both perspectives, from the studio management and from the creative side. Tom McCarthy, Sony Pictures Entertainment, thanks for your time. Tom Ozanich, thank you for your time as well and for sharing some of your insight.
Our pleasure. My pleasure.
Yeah, hopefully we can talk again in the future about some of the work down the road and some of the new studios when they come online.
That'd be fantastic.
Very good. Well, thanks again, guys. Great speaking with both of you.
Bye, Tom.
Bye. Thank you very much.